the Havenwood Community Library, nestled amidst the quiet, tree-lined suburban streets of Ohio, typically hummed with the predictable, gentle cadence of a weekday afternoon. Sunlight, a diffuse, golden haze, filtered through the tall, arched windows, illuminating lazy motes of dust dancing in the air, settling almost imperceptibly on the polished oak tables and the spines of countless, well-loved books. Here, within this hallowed space, a silent temple dedicated to the quiet reverence for knowledge. Beatrice B. Holloway. A librarian whose life was as meticulously organized as the Dewey Decimal System she so faithfully upheld, navigated her profoundly solitary existence. She was a woman of quiet, almost invisible dedication, her days unfolding in a familiar choreography of precise book reshelving, gentle guidance of patrons to the correct section, and, most frequently, the soft but firm shush directed at overly enthusiastic children whose youthful exuberance threatened to disrupt the library's sacred hush. Her evenings, much like her days, unfolded with a similar unvarying rhythm, a testament to her carefully constructed routines. Back in her small, meticulously kept apartment, situated directly above a local bakery, the comforting, if constant, scent of warm, rising bread permeated the air, acting as a familiar, almost domestic, companion. Dinner was always a solitary affair, a single, perfectly portioned serving of baked chicken, alongside a small mound of meticulously steamed vegetables, consumed in an almost profound silence at a small, round, unassuming table. The only audible sounds were the precise, rhythmic ticking of an antique grandfather clock in the hallway, an heirloom from a long-forgotten aunt, and the distant, almost subliminal hum of traffic from the main street, a faint echo of the bustling world beyond her insulated sanctuary. There were no lively conversations to punctuate the quiet, no convivial clinking of shared glasses, no comforting murmur of another's presence. Her life, for many years, had been a series of meticulously constructed routines, a quiet, almost impenetrable fortress against the chaotic, often overwhelming outside world. To the casual observer, B was merely a fixture of the library, an unassuming, almost anonymous woman whose very existence seemed to blend seamlessly into the background, as unnoticed and integral as the dancing dust motes caught in the sunbeams. Parents, often rushing their children through the library doors between frantic soccer practices and demanding piano lessons, would offer B a curt, preoccupied nod or a fleeting, distracted smile, seeing only a diligent guardian of books, a silent enforcer of rules, rather than a complex individual with a rich, vibrant inner world, and the children, particularly the boisterous ones whose energy seemed boundless, frequently perceived her as little more than a living embodiment of the ubiquitous, quiet please sign, a necessary but ultimately ignorable part of the library landscape. They saw her as a hurdle to be navigated, a minor inconvenience, rather than a person worthy of genuine attention or respect. One particularly dreary Tuesday afternoon, a day that felt custom-made for indoor activities. The children's section of the library was unusually vibrant, bordering on chaotic. Rain lashed against the tall, arched windows with insistent force, creating a soothing, almost hypnotic drumming sound that, to most, might have offered a sense of calm. However, a small, visibly timid boy named Leo, his face already flushed with acute embarrassment, stumbled awkwardly near a tall, precariously stacked bookshelf. With a cascade of movement, a carefully constructed tower of colorful picture books toppled to the floor with a loud, resounding thud that seemed to echo disproportionately through the usually hushed section. The sudden noise drew startled glances from several reading adults and a sharp, irritated glare from another librarian, a younger woman named Chloe, known throughout the staff for her perpetually frayed nerves and quick temper. B, who had been meticulously alphabetizing a trolley laden with new literary arrivals, paused her precise movements, her gaze, gentle yet perceptive, immediately fixed upon Leo, whose eyes were already welling up with unshed tears, his lower lip trembling uncontrollably, mortified by the sudden, disruptive cascade, instead of the sharp, public reprimand Leo clearly anticipated. B simply knelt with an unhurried grace, her movements deliberate and inherently gentle. Her voice, when she finally spoke, was surprisingly soft, almost a comforting murmur, barely audible against the rhythmic drumming of the rain against the window panes. "It's all right, dear," she whispered, her gaze, filled with an innate kindness, meeting Leo's tear-filled, distraught eyes. "Accidents happen. No harm done. Not to the books. Not to you." She began, with quiet patience, to pick up the fallen books, not with a weary sigh of exasperation, but with a methodical, almost ritualistic rhythm. She demonstrated to Leo how to turn each book face up, how to align them neatly into straight, comforting rows, and how to slide them back onto the shelf with a gentle, reassuring push. "See," she murmured, her voice a soft cadence, like little soldiers standing at attention. "They like to be neat, just like we do." She even paused her work to point out a particularly colorful, intricate illustration in one of the books, diverting his attention and subtly drawing him into the quiet, shared task. As they worked side by side, a silent, comforting tableau amidst the lingering echoes of the thud, B noticed a small, almost imperceptible tear in the spine of a worn copy of the little engine that could... Without a single word, she retrieved a small, unassuming roll of clear archival tape from the deep, practical pocket of her sensible cardigan, a testament to her meticulous nature, for she always carried it. Prepared for any minor library emergency, she carefully mended the tear with practiced precision, smoothing down the tape with a delicate, knowing hand. "There," she said, her voice soft with satisfaction, offering the now mended book back to Leo, who had watched her every movement with wide-eyed, almost reverent fascination. "Good as new. And because you were such a very good helper," she added, a faint, rare smile touching her lips. "This one's for you. Keep up the good work." She reached back into the deep pocket of her cardigan, pulling out a slightly faded, but perfectly preserved, vintage comic book from a small, secret stack she kept for truly special occasions, for children who needed an extra bit of encouragement. Leo's small face, moments ago clouded with profound shame and incipient tears, now broke into a shy, utterly radiant smile that seemed to light up the quiet corner of the library. He clutched the comic book, his small fingers tracing the vibrant, colorful cover, as if it were the most precious, priceless treasure he had ever received. His quiet, almost inaudible, "Thank you, Miss B," was barely a whisper. Yet B heard it, not just with her ears, but with her heart, and felt a familiar, deep warmth spread through her chest. It was a small act, almost imperceptible in the grand, bustling scheme of things, a fleeting moment unnoticed by most, but it was an act of profound, unwavering kindness and infinite patience, powerfully revealing the quiet dignity and unwavering compassion that lay beneath her seemingly stern, often misinterpreted, exterior. It was a moment that, for Leo, irrevocably transformed B from a mere figure of distant authority into a quiet, understanding guardian, a true keeper of both treasured books and tender, vulnerable hearts. This small, unheralded gesture of empathy and genuine care was a cornerstone of B's character, a quality often overlooked by a world too busy to truly see beyond the surface. Unbeknownst to the vast majority of people, even those who worked alongside her daily, B possessed an extraordinary, almost uncanny, sensitivity to sound. It was a peculiar and unforeseen byproduct of a childhood accident that had, in a strange twist of fate, profoundly shaped her auditory world. When she was merely 8 years old, a minor, seemingly innocuous car collision had left her with a permanent, although not total, hearing impairment in her left ear. Yet, in a bizarre and truly compensatory phenomenon, her right ear had somehow overcorrected, becoming acutely, almost painfully, sensitive to every subtle vibration, every faint tremor, and every minute auditory detail in her surrounding environment. This meant that while she might occasionally struggle to hear a direct question posed to her in a crowded, noisy room, she could effortlessly discern the faintest rustle of a turning page from across the reading room, the distant, almost subliminal hum of a faulty fluorescent light fixture hidden high above, or the almost imperceptible creak of a building settling on its ancient foundations. This heightened auditory awareness, while often a source of discomfort, loud, sudden noises could send a jarring, almost physical jolt through her hypersensitive right ear, causing sharp headaches, was also, fundamentally, a hidden, almost secret, talent. She rarely, if ever, spoke of it, having learned early on in life that most people found it peculiar, difficult to comprehend, or simply didn't believe her fantastical descriptions of sound. She had endured countless dismissals, from bewildered doctors who couldn't adequately explain the phenomenon, to well-meaning but ultimately uncomprehending family members who simply urged her to just ignore the phantom noises or stop imagining things. So, she had learned to keep it to herself. A private burden she bore with quiet resilience and a peculiar, often misunderstood gift she nurtured in secret. She had, over the years, developed an intricate mental filter, learning to selectively mute the cacophony of everyday life, to focus instead on the soft, comforting murmurs of a child engrossed in a book, the gentle, rhythmic turning of pages, and the pervasive, almost comforting hush of a well-run, beloved library. Yet sometimes, her brow would furrow almost imperceptibly, a subtle, almost unnoticeable frown touching her lips as she strained to identify a faint, unusual sound that no one else seemed to notice, a distant, rhythmic clatter that didn't quite fit the ambient noise, a faint, high-pitched whine that seemed to linger in the background long after any discernible source had passed. It was a detail she always kept tucked away, a private anomaly in her meticulously ordered world, a quiet, insistent whisper of an unspoken, unusual talent that would, in the very near future, become profoundly, unexpectedly, and terrifyingly significant. The quiet before the storm was more intricate than anyone could fathom, filled with a silent warning only Bee could hear, the rhythmic ticking of the antique grandfather clock in Bee's small, meticulously kept apartment, usually a comforting and predictable backdrop to her solitary evenings, now sounded like a relentless, ominous metronome, each precise tick a stark, chilling reminder of her escalating unease. For the past 2 days, an insidious, almost imperceptible scent had begun to infiltrate the familiar, comforting aroma of old paper, aged dust, and polished wood that typically characterized the Havenwood Community Library. It wasn't a strong smell, not at first. It was too subtle for that, too evasive, more like a faint, sickly sweet almond, perhaps reminiscent of burnt sugar, or the ghostly whisper of something metallic, something vaguely industrial and deeply unsettling. It was an undeniable anomaly, a tiny, almost invisible fissure in the carefully curated quietude of her well-ordered world. Bee, with her hypersensitive right ear, a peculiar gift born from an old injury, also detected a new sound, a subtle, discordant counterpoint to the usual symphony of creaks, groans, and gentle murmurs that characterized the old library building. It was a high-pitched, almost musical hiss, barely audible to the average ear, like air escaping a bicycle tire with agonizing slowness. But it was undeniably persistent, a thin, unnerving thread woven into the fabric of the library's otherwise peaceful quiet. The sound seemed to originate from the children's reading nook, a cozy, brightly colored corner situated in the library's oldest section, where ancient, labyrinthine gas pipes snaked unseen behind a false wall, nestled precariously near the well-worn beanbag chairs and the perpetually messy, haphazard pile of vibrant picture books. At first, Bee, ever the pragmatist, tried desperately to dismiss it, Her unique, amplified hearing often played tricks on her, picking up phantom sounds or magnifying subtle ambient noises that others simply filtered out as background hum. Perhaps it was just the ancient, temperamental heating system acting up again, a common occurrence in the aging building, or merely a draft whistling through a poorly sealed, cracked window. She told herself, sternly, that she was being overly sensitive, succumbing to the anxieties of a fussy old maid, a dismissive epithet she'd once, painfully, overheard a particularly impatient parent use to describe her. The very thought of raising a public alarm over a phantom smell or a whispering pipe filled her with a familiar, suffocating dread of being dismissed, of being seen as neurotic, overly dramatic, or worse, losing her quiet authority. She had always prided herself on her calm, rational demeanor, the quiet efficiency and unshakable composure that kept the library running smoothly, an almost invisible hand guiding its daily operations. She decidedly did not want to be that librarian, the one who saw catastrophic problems where none objectively existed, who caused unnecessary fuss and panic. However, despite her strenuous efforts to rationalize it away, the scent grew stronger with each passing hour, becoming more pervasive, more intrusive, clinging to the air like a phantom limb ache that refused to dissipate. Regardless of how she tried to ignore it, the hiss, too, became unmistakably more pronounced, a thin, insistent, almost malevolent thread woven so deeply into the fabric of the library's quietude that it was now impossible to ignore. It was no longer a trick of her imagination, no longer a figment of her overactive senses. Her internal alarm bells, usually so meticulously controlled, so precisely regulated, began to clang with an insistent, undeniable urgency, vibrating through her very bones. She couldn't shake the terrifying feeling that something was fundamentally, horrifyingly wrong. A profoundly discordant note in the library's carefully composed, familiar symphony. Her mind raced, a frantic kaleidoscope of possibilities and terrifying implications. Gas, the distinct, unsettling, cloying odor of natural gas, with its intentionally added mercaptan chemical to make it detectable, was, once identified, absolutely unmistakable. The relentless hiss, the sweet, sickening smell, the pinpointed location near the old pipe infrastructure, all of it coalesced into one terrifying, undeniable conclusion: a gas leak, a real one. And it was happening in her library, a cherished sanctuary filled daily with hundreds of unsuspecting, vulnerable children, diligent students, and beloved community members. The thought sent a jolt of ice through her veins. A wave of profound, bone-chilling anxiety washed over Bea, so powerful it almost buckled her knees. Her heart hammered against her ribs with an erratic, frantic rhythm, a terrifying drumbeat that echoed the relentless ticking clock in her apartment. She felt a profound internal struggle, a fierce conflict between her deeply ingrained instinct to avoid confrontation, to maintain her quiet, unassuming, unproblematic role, warring ferociously with a surging, almost overwhelming wave of protective urgency. She often observed the children in the library, their faces alight with unadulterated curiosity as they discovered new stories, their innocent, joyful laughter echoing playfully through the towering aisles of books. Leo, the timid, sweet boy whose fallen books she'd so patiently helped mend, often sat in that very reading nook, lost entirely in the vibrant, fantastical worlds of graphic novels, the terrifying thought of them, vulnerable and utterly unaware of the invisible, deadly threat surrounding them, ignited a fierce, almost primal need within her to act, to do something, anything, immediately. This wasn't just about a smell. It was about their precious, irreplaceable safety, their very lives hanging in the balance. With a deep, shaky breath that did little to calm her trembling hands, Bea made her resolute decision. She would report it. She would trust her own heightened instincts, her peculiar, powerful gift, regardless of how she might be perceived. regardless of the inevitable dismissals. She picked up the old, rotary phone on her worn wooden desk, her fingers fumbling slightly as she painstakingly dialed the long familiar number for the building maintenance office. "Havenwood Community Library. B. Holloway speaking," she stated, trying desperately to keep her voice steady, even professional, betraying none of the internal turmoil raging within her. "I need to report a possible gas leak. It's urgent." A gruff, tired voice answered on the other end, cutting through the static. It was Mr. Henderson, the building superintendent, a man whose notorious reputation for sluggishness, chronic procrastination, and an almost pathological penchant for cutting corners on maintenance issues preceded him throughout the entire city municipality. He was nearing his long-awaited retirement, and his primary motivation for the past few years seemed to be doing the absolute bare minimum required to collect his pension. Gas leak. "You say," Mr. Henderson scoffed, a dry, dismissive cough following his words, imbued with clear annoyance. "Miss Holloway, are you absolutely sure about that? We just had the annual inspection last month. Meticulously done. Nothing wrong then. Probably just that old sewage smell from the basement again. You know how that old building is. Or maybe the coffee machine acting up, burning out a fuse." "Huh." He sounded profoundly annoyed, as if B was personally inconveniencing him with trivialities, interrupting his precious, peaceful afternoon. His mind, even as she spoke, was firmly fixed on the half-finished crossword puzzle lying open on his desk, the promising crack of a cold beer, and the eagerly anticipated baseball game set to begin in an hour. He mentally pictured B as an overly cautious, slightly eccentric, perpetually complaining old woman, always finding fault, always stirring up trouble where none existed. He dismissed her concerns as the overactive imagination of a hypersensitive woman. "No, Mr. Henderson. It's different this time," B insisted, her voice gaining a desperate, almost pleading edge, the urgency finally breaking through her professional facade. "It's that distinct, unnatural odor, and there's a definite, continuous hissing sound coming from the children's reading nook. It's stronger now. I'm truly concerned, deeply so, for everyone's safety." Mr. Henderson sighed loudly, a theatrically exaggerated exhalation designed to convey his immense, overflowing irritation and his perceived burden. "Look, Miss Holloway, I'm tied up with a major burst pipe emergency across town right now. A real mess. It's probably nothing, just the old building settling. These old places make all sorts of noises. Just keep an eye on it. I'll try to swing by sometime early next week, if I can squeeze it into my schedule." He spoke the words with no true intention of ever coming. He had a long-standing reputation for saving the city money on unnecessary maintenance calls, a reputation he genuinely believed would secure his comfortable early retirement pension without further incident. He summarily dismissed B's urgent concerns as the paranoid ramblings of a hypersensitive, overly imaginative woman, someone prone to hysterics. The line clicked dead with a harsh finality. Mr. Henderson had abruptly hung up. B stared at the receiver, then slowly, carefully placed it back into its cradle. A cold, sickening knot of dread tightening in her stomach, gripping her insides. He had dismissed her. Flat out refused to come. The crushing responsibility, the terrifying, immense weight of it, settled squarely and irrevocably on her frail shoulders. She was utterly on her own. The faint, sickly, sweet smell of gas seemed to intensify in the sudden quiet, mocking her profound isolation, mocking the very idea that she could rely on anyone else, that the system would protect those under her care. The refusal from Mr. Henderson was the undeniable point of no return. It wasn't just a simple dismissal, it was a profound, terrifying abandonment. B had reached out, followed every single protocol, done everything correctly, and been met with utter indifference and callous negligence. Her initial hesitation, her deeply ingrained fear of being perceived as a difficult or hysterical old woman, had been tragically, undeniably confirmed. But this confirmation, this profound disappointment, didn't make her retreat into her shell of quiet routine. Instead, it ignited a spark of fierce, unyielding determination. A silent, unwavering resolve solidified within her. She couldn't rely on the broken system. She couldn't rely on anyone else. She had to trust her own heightened senses, her own gut instinct, her unique, strange gift, the subtle, persistent hiss, the sweet, cloying, unmistakable smell. They were no longer vague anxieties, not figments of her imagination. They were concrete, terrifying, life-threatening facts. The Havenwood Community Library, her beloved sanctuary, her quiet fortress, was rapidly transforming into a death trap, a ticking time bomb, and only she, Bee Holloway, seemed to hear its terrifying countdown. She was now irrevocably pushed onto a path of self-reliance, a path that would demand every ounce of her overlooked courage, her peculiar abilities, and her quiet strength. The storm was no longer a distant threat on the horizon. It was gathering, invisibly, menacingly, within the very walls of the Havenwood Community Library, poised to unleash its destructive fury. The insidious scent of natural gas, now an undeniable and alarmingly persistent presence, permeated the very air of the Havenwood Community Library, mingling jarringly with the familiar, comforting aroma of aging paper and faint disinfectant. Bee's hypersensitive right ear, a silent, ever-vigilant sentinel, picked up the escalating hiss of the escaping gas with excruciating clarity. It was no longer a subtle whisper. Barely discernible amidst the ambient hum of the building, it had intensified into a steadily growing, high-pitched shriek, a terrifying, unnatural counterpoint to the boisterous, escalating clamor emanating from the children's section. This dissonance between the external chaos and the internal, lethal threat amplified Bee's profound sense of dread. In that very corner, a vibrant, brightly colored space designed for youthful discovery, a group of heedless teenagers had unequivocally established their noisy dominion. At the undisputed forefront was Jason Miller, a swaggering, overly confident 16-year-old with an unearned air of superiority, who seemed to regard the hallowed library premises as nothing more than a convenient, if somewhat restrictive, backdrop for his boisterous social escapades. Beside him, hunched over her glowing smartphone, was Chloe Davis, a girl all sharp wit and perpetually sarcastic glances, whose profound phone addiction meant her head was almost constantly bowed, her thumbs flying across the screen in a blur of texting and social media scrolling. And hovering shyly, almost attempting to melt into the background like an unseen shadow, was Mark Chen, Jason's reluctant, perpetually uncomfortable follower, whose visible discomfort was palpable, but whose courage to object to Jason's antics was, as always, utterly non-existent. They were huddled tightly around a portable gaming console, its cheap, tinny speakers blaring the deafening cacophony of a virtual car race, exaggerated engine roars, shrill, synthetic screeching tires, and the triumphant, amplified shouts of virtual commentators, their real-life laughter, loud and unrestrained, coupled with their boisterous shouts, punctuated by Chloe's high-pitched mocking taunts and Jason's triumphant ear-splitting whoops, easily and effectively drowned out the increasingly urgent, high-pitched hiss of the escaping gas. They were a microcosm of youthful obliviousness, their internal world of digital entertainment utterly eclipsing the escalating deadly reality around them. B, positioned at the main circulation desk, a quiet island amidst the growing storm, felt a cold, leaden knot of dread tightening relentlessly in her stomach, twisting her insides. The gas odor was now undeniable, a cloying, sickening sweetness that made her temples throb with an insistent ache. The hiss, a direct, piercing assault on her hypersensitive right ear, vibrated through her skull, amplifying her burgeoning panic to an almost unbearable degree. She looked across the expanse of the library at the oblivious teenagers, Then her gaze drifted to the casual disinterest of the few adults scattered throughout the library's various sections. A young mother, Mrs. Davies, Chloe's own mother, was seated just a few tables away, ostensibly engrossed in a glossy magazine, occasionally glancing up with a faint frown at the incessant noise. But making no discernible move to intervene or admonish her daughter, she silently judged B. Her internal monologue filled with assumptions that the librarian was simply overly strict, perpetually grumpy, and out of touch with modern youth. Why can't B just lighten up? Why can't she just let kids be kids? They're just having some harmless fun. It's a library, for goodness sake, not a mausoleum. That woman is just looking for problems. Mrs. Davies's unvoiced thoughts were a direct mirror of the community's general, prevailing perception of B, a humorless stickler for outdated rules, an isolated figure unable to connect with the vibrant energy of contemporary life. This widespread misunderstanding was a thick, impenetrable barrier between B and any potential ally. B knew, with a terrifying certainty, that she had to act, and she had to do so immediately. There was no time for polite explanations, no time to wait for help that, as Mr. Henderson had so clearly demonstrated, simply wouldn't come. The gas leak was not just present, it was actively escalating, growing more dangerous with every passing second. She straightened her sensible cardigan, a small, almost ritualistic gesture of preparation, took a deep, shuddering breath, and walked with determined purpose towards the epicenter of the noise, the children's section. Her footsteps, firm but carefully measured, echoed subtly on the polished floor. As she approached, the combined assault of the blaring video game, the teenagers' raucous shouts, and the insidious, escalating hiss of the gas became an almost unbearable sensory overload. Her right ear throbbed with a dull, incessant ache, a physical manifestation of the acute auditory warning she couldn't ignore. Her body was screaming for her to retreat, but her mind commanded her forward. She stopped directly before the group of teenagers, her face pale beneath the library's fluorescent lights, her lips pressed into a thin, resolute line. She didn't shout, didn't plead, didn't engage in the usual back and forth. Her voice, when she finally spoke, was low, almost a chilling whisper, yet it carried an unusual, almost supernatural authority, a steely conviction that momentarily cut through the pervasive din. "Quiet, please," she commanded. Her eyes, usually soft, now fixed directly on Jason Miller's surprised face. Her voice held a note of uncharacteristic urgency, a severity that made Jason look up from his screen, momentarily startled and genuinely taken aback by the unyielding force in her tone. Jason, however, quickly recovered his customary swaggering composure. He shot a quick glance at Chloe, who rolled her eyes in a gesture of shared teenage defiance, and then at the hesitant, shrinking Mark. He saw B, a seemingly frail, unassuming figure, and heard only the familiar, irritating, and, in his mind, utterly ignorable request of an old woman. He sneered openly. "What's wrong? Miss B can't handle a little fun? Is the library too lively for your old bones?" He then, with a deliberate, arrogant flourish, turned the volume knob on the console, cranking it even louder. The simulated engine roars now boomed and echoed off the library shelves with deafening, almost painful intensity. Chloe let out a cackle, a sharp mocking sound, and, pulling out her own phone, began to record a video, clearly intending to capture B's overreaction for her social media followers, anticipating viral amusement. Mark, though visibly uncomfortable and shifting nervously, offered a weak, nervous laugh, unwilling, as always, to cross Jason and risk social ostracization. B's eyes narrowed, not in anger, but in a profound, terrifying realization. The deliberate increase in noise was not merely an act of defiance, a public humiliation. It was, more terrifyingly, a dangerous amplification that was effectively masking the rapidly growing threat of the gas leak. She could almost feel the invisible gas expanding, saturating the very air molecules around them. Her acute sense of hearing, usually her secret burden, was now her tormentor and her most vital tool, making her hyper-aware of the subtle changes in the air pressure, the faint, ominous crackles of static electricity emanating from the buzzing overhead fluorescent lights. She felt an immediate and profound internal conflict, her desperate desire to explain the danger, to make them understand the invisible, lethal threat, clashed violently with the even more desperate, primal need to simply get them out, to evacuate them quickly, without causing a full-blown panic that might, ironically, exacerbate the situation and potentially trigger a catastrophic explosion. Unbeknownst to the children, or indeed to Bee herself in that moment of crisis, another, far more sinister force was actively at play within the library's aging walls, contributing directly to the escalating peril. In his cramped, cluttered office, strategically located just beyond the children's section and thus closest to the dangerously aging gas lines, sat Victor Vance, a conniving and profoundly avaricious member of the library's board of trustees. Victor was a man whose carefully cultivated public persona of unwavering community dedication masked a deep-seated, corrosive greed. He was, in fact, secretly and systematically skimming substantial funds from the library's already meager maintenance budget, diverting money specifically allocated for essential and urgent structural repairs, including, crucially, the inspection, repair, and upkeep of the very gas lines that were now leaking, into his own illicit offshore accounts. He was a master of bureaucratic obfuscation, meticulously manipulating quarterly reports to minimize necessary expenditures and strategically delay critical building overhauls. Victor, hunched over his computer, was growing increasingly agitated by the incessant, booming noise emanating from the children's section. The booming explosions from Jason's game and the kids' raucous laughter were a constant, grating distraction, making it impossible for him to focus on the intricate, deliberately convoluted spreadsheets he was manipulating, each subtly altered number a step closer to his next ill-gotten gain. He grumbled audibly, his face contorted in a sneer of profound irritation, eyeing the time on his desk clock. Why can't that old witch Bee control those brats? This library needs to be run like a lean, efficient business, not some chaotic, undisciplined playground. Perhaps this persistent noise problem will finally give me the irrefutable excuse I need to push for significant staff cutbacks. Bee first, of course. She's too old, too fussy, too expensive, and utterly useless. Getting rid of her would save a considerable sum that I could covertly funnel into my own pockets. He considered making a phone call to Bee, but decided against it, choosing instead to revel in her apparent inability to manage the unruly children. He actively desired her public failure, wanting to create a clear, undeniable pretext for her dismissal, thereby saving even more money that he could clandestinely pocket. He was utterly oblivious to the life-threatening gas leak, or perhaps, in his self-absorbed avarice, subconsciously ignored any faint, unusual scent or sound, his focus entirely consumed by his own petty greed and profound annoyance. He saw the children's noise as a strategic advantage, a convenient lever to further his corrupt, self-serving agenda, rather than a horrifying symptom of a larger, rapidly escalating, and imminently dangerous problem. As Jason and Chloe continued their defiant, amplified play, their laughter echoing off the shelves, Bee felt the very ground beneath her feet vibrate with a faint, uneasy tremor. The air was palpably getting heavier, thicker, the cloying sweetness of the gas now almost suffocating, burning the back of her throat. She could hear the gas hiss with agonizing clarity, its sound like a malevolent snake uncoiling itself, hissing a prelude to its imminent strike. The overhead fluorescent lights, already buzzing faintly, flickered almost imperceptibly, a ghostly, silent dance of unstable current, mirroring the instability within the walls. Bee knew, with a chilling certainty that pierced her soul, that time was no longer just running out. It was nearly gone. She had to use her authority, exert her will, and act decisively, immediately, to avert the catastrophe she felt looming. She had to ensure that the innocent children, her unheeded charges, were safely out of harm's way. The confrontation had solidified the roles Bee, the unlikely, unheeded guardian, whose unique senses bore the burden of a terrifying truth. The children, her unwitting, imperiled charges, lost in their world of digital distraction, and Victor Vance, the true, insidious antagonist, whose relentless greed was an invisible accomplice to the building's rapidly growing peril. The stage was tragically set, the air thick with dramatic irony, and the silence before the impending roar was deafening, known only to be the Havenwood Community Library, once a bastion of quiet contemplation and intellectual pursuit, had now, to Beatrice Holloway's acutely heightened senses, transformed into an ominous, rapidly accelerating pressure cooker. The air, a tangible presence, grew perceptibly thicker and heavier with the pervasive, sickeningly sweet scent of natural gas. It clung to the old bookshelves, permeated the upholstery of the worn armchairs, and settled deep into the very fabric of the old building. B's hypersensitive right ear, a silent, vibrating alarm system, picked up the escalating hiss with excruciating clarity. It was no longer a subtle whisper, barely discernible amidst the ambient hum of the fluorescent lights. It had intensified into a relentless, high-pitched shriek, a terrifying, unnatural siren song that clawed at her eardrum, a warning only she seemed fully capable of perceiving. The oblivious laughter and raucous shouts of the teenagers, particularly Jason Miller's triumphant whoops and Chloe Davis's sarcastic cackles, grated against her raw nerves, not merely as an annoyance, but as a dangerous, life-threatening impediment, effectively masking the urgent, escalating warning of the invisible, deadly leak. B's mind, usually a calm and meticulously organized filing cabinet of literary facts, library protocols, and patron requests, was now a whirlwind of frantic, terrifying calculations. The gas smell was no longer debatable. It was undeniable, sickeningly sweet, cloying, like poisoned almonds, burning the back of her throat. The hiss, a high-frequency torment that vibrated through her good ear, resonated through the very floorboards beneath her sensible, worn shoes. She knew, with a chilling certainty that settled deep in her bones, that the danger was no longer theoretical or speculative. It was imminent. Every instinct, every fiber of her being, screamed for immediate, decisive action. She glanced frantically at the few adults scattered throughout the library, each lost in their own worlds. Mrs. Davies, still ostensibly engrossed in her glossy magazine, occasionally shot an irritated glance towards her daughter Chloe and Jason, her frown indicating mild annoyance at their volume, rather than any glimmer of awareness of the invisible, lethal threat rapidly saturating the air around them. Other patrons sat hunched over their laptops, their faces illuminated by screens, lost in their digital worlds, or were buried deep within the pages of weighty tomes, their minds far removed from their immediate surroundings, completely oblivious to the accelerating peril. B felt an overwhelming, crushing sense of isolation. She was the sole guardian, the only one privy to the library's terrifying, deadly secret. The weight of their unsuspecting vulnerability fell entirely upon her. Her first, deeply ingrained instinct was to follow established protocol. She knew, intellectually, that she had to alert someone with official authority, someone who could initiate a full-scale, organized evacuation. She strode purposefully towards the main circulation desk, her movements swift, despite the almost imperceptible tremor in her hands. She fumbled for the internal telephone, her fingers clumsy with adrenaline, and quickly dialed the direct number for the library director's office. The phone rang. Once, twice, 3 times, each ring echoing the escalating drumbeat of her rising panic. "The director is in a conference all day." "Miss Holloway," came the automated voice, flat and unhelpful, utterly devoid of human empathy or urgency. "Please leave a message after the tone." B, her jaw clenched, slammed the receiver down with a frustrated thud. A wave of profound, acidic frustration washed over her, quickly replaced by a cold surge of debilitating fear. The system, theoretically designed to protect its patrons and staff in an emergency, had utterly failed her. She was alone, caught between a ticking time bomb and bureaucratic indifference. Next, desperate, and with no other immediate recourse, she tried the external emergency number for the city's gas company, a vital string of digits plastered on a small, yellowed sticker near the phone. She dialed, her heart pounding against her ribs like a trapped bird. The line rang, once, then twice, then finally connected, but not to a human voice. "Thank you for calling Havenwood Gas and Electric. Due to an unusually high volume of emergency calls, your wait time may be extended. Please hold for the next available representative." The automated message repeated in a monotonous, cold, robotic voice, utterly devoid of urgency, a cruel serenade to her escalating nightmare. She heard the tinny, generic elevator music begin to play, a chilling soundtrack to the impending disaster. Bee's eyes darted frantically around the library. People were still browse the shelves, their faces serene. Children were still laughing, their innocent joy a painful contrast to the silent threat. The gas was still hissing, its sound growing louder, more insistent. She knew, with a terrifying, gut-wrenching certainty, that she didn't have the luxury of an extended wait time. She had minutes, maybe less. The weight of responsibility pressed down on her, an almost unbearable, crushing burden that threatened to suffocate her. She was, after all, just a librarian, a quiet keeper of books, not an emergency responder, not a hero. Her days were typically spent among the quiet rustle of pages, the gentle whispers of children learning, not the deafening shriek of escaping gas or the ominous creak of a building on the verge of collapse. Yet, here she was, the sole sentinel, the only one who seemed to hear the invisible alarm, the only one who could potentially avert a catastrophic explosion. The Havenwood Community Library, her beloved sanctuary, her quiet, orderly world, had become a literal death trap, and she was its unwitting, and now agonizingly solitary, guardian. The air grew perceptibly heavier, thicker, the cloying sweetness of the gas almost suffocating, burning the back of her throat and making her eyes water. The hiss sharpened, rising in pitch to an almost unbearable level, like a tea kettle screaming just before it boils over, its metallic shriek filling her head. It wasn't just gas escaping, it was escaping with alarming, accelerating force, building immense pressure within the aging, corroding pipes behind the walls. This sudden, acute escalation, this terrifying change in the sound and feel of the air, sent a profound jolt of raw, unadulterated terror through Bee's veins. Her childhood trauma, the muffled, distorted sound of the car tires screeching, followed by the sudden, jarring impact that had stolen her hearing in one ear, flashed vividly in her mind. A terrifying premonition. Her hypersensitive right ear, a peculiar gift often a burden in moments of joy or loud public gatherings, was now a terrifyingly precise, unforgiving warning system. It told her, with chilling, undeniable clarity, that time was not just running out, it was nearly gone. She had to act, and she had to act now. She turned her gaze, narrowed and sharp with a newfound, desperate focus, back to the children's section. Jason and Chloe, still fueled by their defiant success against her earlier shush and completely oblivious to the real danger, were now engaged in a full-blown, shouting argument over the gaming console, their voices raised in competitive, angry fervor. Mark, as usual, was trying to melt into the background, his face buried deep in his hands, wishing himself invisible. Their noise, once just a minor annoyance, was now a lethal shroud, an acoustic camouflage effectively masking the sound of their impending doom, a sound that only Bee could hear. Suddenly, from the corner of her eye, Bee saw a figure emerge from the director's office, a glass-walled enclosure located just past the children's section. It was Victor Vance, the Board of Trustees member, his face contorted in a sneer of profound irritation and thinly veiled anger. He held his expensive smartphone to his ear, his voice loud and demanding, attempting to conduct an important business call over the cacophony emanating from the children's area. He was utterly, dangerously oblivious to the gas leak, completely deaf to the insidious hiss. his focus entirely consumed by his self-important call and his profound annoyance at the noise. He shot a venomous glare towards B, as if blaming her personally for the unruly children and the disruption to his precious work. He then began to move purposefully towards the children's section, not to intervene or help, but to simply glower, his eyes conveying his deep frustration and disdain. His very presence, his self-absorption, his absolute horrifying unawareness of the accelerating danger, amplified B's overwhelming sense of desperate urgency. He was a living, breathing symbol of the very bureaucratic negligence and personal greed that had allowed this catastrophe to brew, unnoticed and unchecked, for far too long. B knew, with absolute certainty, that she couldn't waste precious seconds trying to explain the invisible threat to Victor. He wouldn't listen. He wouldn't believe her. He would probably accuse her of hysterics, of trying to shirk her duties, or worse, of undermining his clandestine plans to cut library staff and pocket the savings. She had only seconds. The pressure built, an invisible, deadly force, saturating every cubic inch of the air. The library, the very walls that had offered her so much solace, so much quiet purpose, were now turning against them all, a silent, implacable enemy. Her eyes darted around, rapidly assessing the environment. The fire exits were clearly marked, but scattered throughout the large building. The main entrance was too far, too exposed, too likely to be a bottleneck. The children's section, with its thin, decorative walls and its terrifying proximity to the leaking pipes, was the undeniable epicenter of the danger. She had to get them out. All of them. And she had to do it without causing a full-blown panic that might make things worse, potentially triggering a deadly chain reaction, a single spark, a static shock from rubbing against a carpet, the flip of a light switch, the ignition of a faulty appliance. Any of it could be the fatal catalyst. B felt a surge of cold, almost analytical clarity cut through her adrenaline-fueled panic. Her brain, accustomed to meticulously organizing vast amounts of information and categorizing the seemingly disparate, began to process the environmental cues at an incredible, almost superhuman speed. The library building's precise layout, the subtle direction of the draft, the exact location of the most pungent gas odor, the minute vibrations underfoot that told her the building was subtly shifting. She noticed a faint, metallic taste in the air, a grim sign that the gas was displacing oxygen, making the air dangerously flammable. Her senses, once a private peculiarity, a secret burden, were now her most potent, vital weapons. She locked eyes with Jason Miller, who, still arguing heatedly with Chloe, finally, for the first time, noticed her intense, unblinking gaze. There was something in her eyes, something beyond mere annoyance or a demand for quiet, something raw and terrifying that briefly, miraculously, silenced him. A flicker of genuine alarm, perhaps, even in his arrogant, self-absorbed gaze, as if a primal part of his brain recognized a fundamental threat. B knew she couldn't waste another precious second. The ticking clock was no longer a metaphor, it was a deafening roar in her ear. She could feel the building breathing around her, groaning under the invisible, immense pressure of the trapped gas. She could hear the gas, a high-pitched, insistent scream in her ear, demanding release, threatening to tear everything apart. The time for polite requests was over. The time for calm explanation was long past. It was time for a command. It was time to pull them, forcibly if necessary, from the very jaws of oblivion. She took a deep, shuddering breath, filling her lungs with the dangerous air, preparing to unleash a power she never knew she possessed, a power born of quiet desperation, profound compassion, and a fierce, unwavering, protective love for the vulnerable souls under her care. The Havenwood Community Library, this seemingly calm and quiet space, was about to become the terrifying stage for an unimaginable horror. And B. Holloway, the unassuming, overlooked librarian, was about to become the unlikely, desperate architect of salvation. The air in the Havenwood Community Library, now thick with the cloying, sickly sweetness of leaking gas, pressed down on Bea Holloway like an invisible, suffocating shroud. The hiss, a high-pitched, relentless shriek in her hypersensitive right ear, had reached a terrifying crescendo, vibrating through the very soles of her worn, sensible shoes. An unbearable physical assault. Her eyes, wide with a potent mixture of raw terror and fierce, unyielding determination, darted frantically from the increasingly agitated teenagers in the children's nook to the unaware patrons scattered throughout the reading rooms, their faces serene in their blissful ignorance. She was standing in the very heart of the unseen monster, a silent, volatile, and rapidly expanding threat permeating every corner of the beloved building, and she was utterly, horrifyingly alone in her full awareness of the impending catastrophe. She knew, with a certainty that chilled her to the bone, that there was no more time for polite requests, no more moments for gentle shushes or soft admonishments. The precious window for explanation had slammed shut with Mr. Henderson's callous dismissal. Every second that ticked by, every shallow breath of gas-saturated air, brought them all inexorably closer to an unimaginable catastrophe. Her mind raced, a frantic kaleidoscope of fragmented emergency scenarios she had, ironically, meticulously catalogued and read about in countless library safety manuals over her decades of service. But no sterile manual, no theoretical knowledge, could ever truly prepare her for the visceral, gut-wrenching terror of this present moment, the overwhelming, crushing weight of dozens of unsuspecting, innocent lives resting solely on her frail, aging shoulders. Bea took a single, resolute step towards the children's section, where Jason, Chloe, and Mark, along with a handful of even younger, oblivious children, were still engrossed in their raucous gaming session and loud, boisterous conversations. The blaring, tinny sound from their portable gaming console was now a physical assault on her eardrum, a deafening wall of simulated engine roars and triumphant shouts that made her head throb with an unbearable ache. But this very noise, paradoxically, fueled her desperate urgency. She could discern the distinct, unhealthy pallor on Jason's face, a subtle, alarming sign that the pervasive gas was already affecting his system, though he, in his youthful arrogance, likely attributed it to the sheer excitement of the game. Chloe, too, coughed slightly, blaming the dusty library air, completely unaware of the poison she was inhaling. They were quite literally, and tragically, inhaling their own doom. She opened her mouth, a raw, primal scream of evacuation forming in her throat, ready to shatter the false calm, but a chilling, agonizing realization stopped her cold, silencing the cry before it could erupt. A loud, sudden command, a public declaration of unadulterated panic, could be utterly disastrous. The immediate, uncontrolled rush for the exits, the potential for dangerous static electricity generated by shuffling feet on the carpet, or even the friction of clothing, the terrifying possibility of a light switch being hastily, instinctively flipped by a fleeing patron. Any of these seemingly innocuous actions could easily ignite the explosive, volatile mixture of gas and air now saturating the building. Panic, she knew, could be as lethally swift and destructive as the gas leak itself. She needed to get them out, but she needed to do it quietly, precisely, with an undeniable, unyielding authority that bypassed their youthful defiance and any adult skepticism. Her eyes, blazing with an almost manic intensity, locked onto Jason, the arrogant, self-proclaimed ringleader of the group. He glanced up, his initial annoyance at her approach quickly replaced by a flicker of genuine confusion as he encountered the raw, untamed intensity in her gaze. Bea didn't utter a single word. Instead, she pointed a trembling, yet unyieldingly firm, finger towards the nearest emergency exit, located at the far end of the children's section, partially obscured by a tall, heavily laden bookshelf. Her gesture was stark, uncompromising, conveying an urgency that transcended mere words, a silent, desperate plea for survival. Jason, however, merely sneered, his arrogance still firmly intact despite the strange intensity of her gaze. "What's your problem now?" "Miss B, are we being too loud for your nap time?" He looked to Chloe, who snickered loudly, her smartphone still clutched in her hand, still recording, poised to capture B's next meltdown for viral amusement. Mark, ever the hesitant shadow, shifted uncomfortably in his beanbag chair, avoiding eye contact, wishing himself invisible. They were a unified, impenetrable front of adolescent defiance and blissful ignorance, completely blind to the gaping abyss opening beneath their very feet. B felt a wave of profound, soul-crushing despair. They weren't listening. They wouldn't listen. And she was losing precious, irretrievable time. The smell of gas was overwhelming now, burning her nostrils, making her feel profoundly lightheaded, dizzy with the insidious poison. The air in the library was heavy, almost viscous, thick with the volatile compound, making every breath a perilous act. The fluorescent lights overhead, already buzzing faintly, began to flicker more dramatically, a rhythmic, disturbing blinking that signaled a grave instability in the building's antiquated electrical system. And then, from somewhere deep within the very fabric of the wall directly behind the children's nook, she heard it, a faint, brittle crackle, followed by a small, dry pop, like a twig snapping underfoot. It was the unmistakable, terrifying sound of arcing electricity, a tiny spark igniting somewhere in the antiquated wiring, reacting to the supersaturated, explosive atmosphere. It was the sound of a fuse, a switch, an electrical connection finally giving way under the strain of the volatile air. That single, innocuous, almost unnoticeable sound was the final, terrifying precursor to annihilation, the ultimate warning before the storm. Time dissolved into a meaningless blur. B's entire life, her decades of training as a librarian, her years of quiet observation, her inherent, almost intuitive understanding of human behavior, all converged into one desperate, instinctual, and powerful surge of raw adrenaline and unwavering purpose. There was no room for hesitation, no time for politeness, no space for doubt. She had to break through their indifference, penetrate their defiant, self-imposed bubble of obliviousness. Their lives, and perhaps her own, depended on it. With a sudden, explosive burst of raw energy that utterly belied her age and her habitually unassuming demeanor, B launched herself forward. She didn't yell a formal command or a panicked scream. Instead, she moved with a frightening swiftness, a blur of sensible cardigan and unyielding determination. She grabbed Jason's arm, her fingers surprisingly strong, digging into his bicep with an iron grip that startled him, forcing him, by sheer physical will, to drop his gaming console to the floor with a loud, clattering crash. The sudden silence, though brief, was jarring. Out now. B's voice was no longer a whisper, nor a shout. It was a guttural, primal command, stripped of all pleasantries, honed by pure, unadulterated terror and an overwhelming survival instinct. It resonated with an authority he had never heard from her, or indeed, from anyone else in his life. Her eyes, wide and blazing with a terrifying, unblinking intensity, were locked on his, conveying a silent, unutterable message of absolute, undeniable danger. There was no anger in them, no frustration, only an overwhelming, desperate urgency that bypassed his teenage bravado, pierced straight to his core, and ignited a flicker of genuine fear within him. Jason, utterly stunned by her sudden, forceful action and the raw, uncharacteristic power in her voice, instinctively recoiled. His face, moments ago contorted in a sneer of defiance, went a ghastly pale with genuine shock and a dawning, bewildered fear. He saw the true horror in her eyes, a horror that radiated from her like a palpable, chilling wave. Chloe, momentarily forgetting her beloved smartphone, stared, her sarcastic smirk dissolving completely into a look of genuine alarm and confusion. Mark, who had been shrinking into his seat, suddenly stiffened, his eyes wide, his timid nature temporarily overridden by the sheer intensity of Bee's presence. Bee didn't wait for their compliance or understanding. She shoved Jason forward with another surprising burst of strength, propelling him bodily towards the emergency exit. Then she turned to Chloe, grabbing her wrist, her grip like iron. "Move!" she commanded, her voice raw and strained from the effort, but still low enough not to trigger widespread, uncontrolled panic amongst the few other patrons who were now slowly, belatedly, looking up with confused expressions. She yanked Chloe, who stumbled, dropping her phone, its screen shattering on the polished floor with a faint, insignificant sound. "Hey, what are you doing?" Chloe shrieked, initially infuriated by the rough handling and the destruction of her device. But then she too saw Bee's face, etched with a terror so profound, so utterly unmasked, that it silenced her mid-protest. She felt the subtle tremor in the air, the strange pressure in her ears, the faint, persistent crackle of electricity in the walls. The sweet, cloying smell was unmistakable now, even to her less sensitive nose, assaulting her senses with its dangerous presence. Bee continued to push, to direct, to herd, her movements economical, precise, and imbued with a desperate purpose. She herded the stunned, bewildered teenagers like a shepherdess, guiding terrified lambs away from an unseen predator. "Mark, go. Help the others," she barked, pointing to the smaller, younger children nearby who were now looking up, bewildered and frightened by the sudden, inexplicable chaos. Mark, surprisingly, sprang into action, his timid nature momentarily overcome by the sheer urgency of Bee's command, grabbing the hands of two younger, crying kids and pulling them frantically towards the emergency exit Bee indicated. The library, once quiet, was now filled with the frantic sounds of Bee's urgent, raspy commands, the scuffling of feet, the muffled cries of frightened children, and the growing, terrifying hiss of the gas, a sound that seemed to consume all other noise. Other patrons, finally stirred by the escalating commotion, began to look up, confusion quickly morphing into dawning alarm on their faces as they too began to notice the overpowering smell. Bee's internal clock was screaming, each tick a hammer blow against her skull. The crackling sound within the walls was getting louder, closer, more insistent. She could practically feel the building itself holding its breath, groaning under the invisible pressure, waiting for the inevitable, catastrophic release. Her ears were screaming from the amplified gas leak, an unbearable, agonizing assault. But she ignored the searing pain, her focus absolute, singular, utterly fixed on getting everyone out. Her attention momentarily flickered to Victor Vance, who had finally emerged from his office, his face purple with a furious rage, having just finished his important business call and now directly witnessing the disruption Bee was causing. He was about to launch into a furious, self-righteous tirade, his mouth opening. But the words caught in his throat. He felt the intense, undeniable vibration in the floor beneath his polished shoes, the strange, suffocating pressure in his ears, and then, for the very first time, the undeniable, sickening, cloying odor of the gas, thick and potent. His eyes widened in dawning, horrifying realization, a ghastly white, a stark, terrifying contrast to his earlier smugness and self-satisfaction. He finally understood. He finally knew the immense, deadly trap he was truly in, a trap his own greed had inadvertently built. He seemed utterly paralyzed by a terror far greater and more profound than mere annoyance or professional indignation. Bee didn't spare him a second glance. Her mission was singular, absolute, unyielding. Get every child, every innocent life, out of the building. She pushed Jason and Chloe through the emergency exit door, its heavy metal protesting with a loud, grating screech. She grabbed one last small boy who was clinging desperately to a bookshelf, his face buried in a book, gently but firmly pulling him away, almost tearing him from the shelves. just as the last child, wide-eyed and terrified, stumbled across the threshold. Bee turned, her hand still on the push-bar of the door, her gaze sweeping the now emptying, gas-filled library. She saw Victor Vance, still standing in the middle of his office doorway, frozen, his face a ghastly ashen white, finally comprehending the immense, deadly trap he was in. He seemed utterly paralyzed by a terror so profound it eclipsed everything else. A terror that mirrored her own, yet was entirely of his own making. "Get out!" Victor B. screamed, her voice hoarse, raw, pushing the very last remnants of her physical strength and willpower into the desperate final warning. It was a guttural plea, a last-ditch effort to save even him. But it was too late. The air crackled. The hiss turned into a roar. The Havenwood Community Library, once a cherished sanctuary of quiet learning and communal gathering, now stood on the precipice of absolute, unimaginable destruction. The air inside, thick and cloying with the pervasive, sickeningly sweet stench of natural gas, seemed to hum with an unbearable tension, a palpable sense of impending doom. Bee Holloway, her face etched with a terrifying blend of adrenaline, profound exhaustion, and an unyielding resolve, had just, with a final surge of strength, shoved the last wide-eyed, trembling child through the emergency exit. Her raw, desperate scream, "Get out, Victor!" still echoed with a chilling resonance in the suddenly silent, gas-filled space, a final, futile plea against the inevitable. Victor Vance, the avaricious, self-serving Board of Trustees member, stood utterly frozen in the doorway of his cluttered office, a mere few feet from the epicenter of the escalating gas leak. His face, moments ago contorted in fury, was now a ghastly ashen white, drained of all color. His eyes, wide with a dawning, horrifying realization that finally eclipsed his petty rage and greed, darted wildly around the room, frantically searching for an escape that no longer existed. He could finally smell the gas, thick and suffocating, burning his nostrils with a noxious sweetness. He could feel the pervasive vibrations in the floor, trembling beneath his feet, the uncomfortable pressure building in his ears, and the terrifying, incessant crackle of arcing electricity. Louder now, ominously close, a prelude to chaos. The meticulously crafted facade of his self-serving schemes, the hidden cuts to critical maintenance budgets, the diverted funds intended for essential repairs, all of it had coalesced into this single, inescapable, horrifying truth. He was trapped. A rat in a death trap of his own greedy making, and the full, horrifying realization slammed into him with the force of a physical blow. His mind, usually so quick to calculate profit and loss, so adept at manipulation, was utterly paralyzed by raw, animalistic terror. He tried desperately to move, to run, to escape, but his legs felt like lead, rooted to the spot by a primal fear so profound it rendered him utterly inert, unable to respond to the survival instinct that screamed within him. Bee's gaze, momentarily fixed on Victor's petrified form, snapped back to the emergency exit door, her hand still instinctively gripping the cold metal pushbar. Her primary mission was accomplished. The children, her precious charges, were out. Her body screamed for her to follow, to escape the invisible demon lurking and expanding within the building's very walls. She could hear the faint, high-pitched scream of the gas reaching its absolute deafening peak, a piercing shriek in her good ear that threatened to burst her eardrum, an agonizing torment that superseded all other pain. The overhead fluorescent lights flickered violently one last time, sputtering erratically, then plunged the entire library into a sudden, terrifying, oppressive darkness, broken only by the dim, diffused light filtering through the high, arched windows. The air itself seemed to crackle with an unseen, malevolent energy, charged and volatile, a fuse already lit. Then, in that terrifying, elongated fraction of a second, the world outside and inside the library held its collective breath. A pregnant, agonizing, Profound silence descended upon the library, deeper and more terrifying than any quiet bee had ever known. It was the absolute silence before the storm, the eerie calm before the thunderclap, a vacuum of sound before an overwhelming, destructive roar. Bee could physically feel the static electricity prickling on her skin, raising the fine hairs on her arms. Smell the acrid, metallic scent of ozone filling her lungs. She saw, in the briefest, most horrifying flash, a tiny, brilliant spark of blue-white light erupt from somewhere deep within Victor Vance's office, near the very wall where the main gas pipes ran. It was likely a frayed wire, a faulty switch, an overloaded circuit, or perhaps even an arcing connection within Victor's own computer, finally surrendering to the supersaturated, volatile atmosphere. And then, hell unleashed its full, unbridled fury. A deafening, concussive boom tore through the stillness, shaking the very foundations of the Havenwood Community Library with a visceral, gut-wrenching force. The sound was not just heard, it was physically felt, a monstrous wave of pressure that slammed into Bee, throwing her forward, ripping her hand from the emergency door, sending her sprawling. A searing wave of superheated air, thick with the smell of burnt chemicals and ruptured gas, rushed past her, followed instantly by a terrifying torrent of shattering glass, splintering wood, and crumbling plaster. The majestic arched windows at the front of the library, once symbols of its grandeur, exploded inward, imploding with a violent force, showering the main reading room with deadly, razor-sharp shards. Bookshelves, once proud and sturdy bastions of knowledge, buckled and disintegrated like matchsticks, sending thousands upon thousands of volumes scattering like autumn leaves in a violent tempest. Swallowed instantly by a colossal, roaring fireball that erupted from the children's section, the very heart of the gas leak, tearing through the library with horrifying, unstoppable speed. A secondary, deeper, more guttural rumble followed, as if the very ground beneath them was protesting, a tortured groan from the building's ancient structure as it began to give way, collapsing inwards upon itself. Dust, thick and acrid, billowed outward from every opening, instantly obscuring everything, turning the once vibrant, orderly library into a chaotic, suffocating maelstrom of destruction, fire, and ruin. The air was filled with the terrifying, cacophonous chorus of twisted metal shrieking, stressed wood groaning and splintering, and the distant, muffled, horrified cries of people outside. The smell of burning books, mingled with the acrid scent of gas and ozone, permeated everything. Outside the shattered main entrance, the scene was one of utter, unspeakable pandemonium. Parents, patrons, and casual passers-by who had been drawn by Bee's earlier frantic commands and the growing commotion, now stood utterly frozen in a tableau of shock, disbelief, and unspeakable horror. They had heard Bee's desperate, unyielding commands, seen her pushing the children with a terrifying urgency, but the full, horrific extent of the danger had been unimaginable, abstract. Now, as the entire front facade of the library building literally peeled open like a detonated tin can, revealing a gaping, fiery maw of fire and ruin, their faces contorted from confusion to dawning, gut-wrenching realization, then to absolute, unspeakable, primal terror. Many screamed, many simply watched, paralyzed. Mrs. Davies, who moments before had been idly flipping through a glossy magazine, blissfully unaware, now stood clutching her chest, her breath stolen, her eyes wide with a horrifying, crushing understanding. She had seen Bee's desperate, unyielding push, had heard Chloe's angry, defiant protests, and then the earth-shattering explosion. Her daughter, her child was in there. A silent scream tore through her, unheard, just as a collective gasp of profound despair ripped through the horrified onlookers. A miracle, a scene of impossible salvation, began to unfold before their disbelieving, tear-filled eyes, through the billowing, choking clouds of dust and the relentless rain of debris. A small, terrified group stumbled out of the shattered emergency exit at the side of the building, coughing uncontrollably, crying hysterically, but undeniably, impossibly alive. It was Jason. His face streaked with soot, but otherwise miraculously unharmed, pulling a sobbing, disoriented Chloe, who was also physically intact, though visibly shaken and covered in dust. Behind them, Mark, pale as a ghost and trembling uncontrollably, helped a much younger child, Leo, whose small face was buried in his chest, muffling his cries. One by one, they emerged from the chaos, disoriented, bewildered, their small bodies shaking with shock, but physically safe, their precious lives snatched from the very jaws of oblivion by the unwavering determination and profound courage of one unassuming librarian. A wave of profound, overwhelming relief, raw and guttural, washed over the crowd, quickly morphing into a chaotic explosion of raw emotion. Cries of joy, of profound, tearful gratitude, erupted from the gathered parents, their voices hoarse with relief. Mothers and fathers rushed forward, heedless of the lingering danger, scooping up their children, embracing them tightly, burying their faces in their hair, tears streaming down their faces, mingling with the dust and soot. Mrs. Davies, seeing Chloe stumble out, alive, screamed her daughter's name, a sound of pure, unadulterated relief, rushing forward and pulling Chloe into a fierce, almost suffocating embrace, burying her face in her hair. "Oh, my baby, you're alive, you're safe." Her earlier, petty irritation with B, her judgmental thoughts, vanished instantly, replaced by a crushing wave of guilt, a horrifying understanding of her own blindness, and an overwhelming surge of profound, unpayable gratitude for the woman who had saved her child. She had judged B, had thought her unkind, overly strict, and insignificant. And yet, this woman, this quiet, unassuming librarian, had, without hesitation, risked her own life for her child. The irony was devastating. Jason, moments ago arrogant and defiant, now stood trembling uncontrollably, looking back at the inferno that had consumed the children's section, the very place he had mocked B. The enormity of what had almost happened, of how terrifyingly close they had come to utter obliteration, washed over him. He saw B, covered in dust and debris, her sensible cardigan torn, slowly staggering out of the emergency exit, moments after them, her hand still clutching the push bar, her entire body shaking with residual shock. Her face was pale, her hair disheveled, but her eyes, though weary, held a fierce, triumphant light, a testament to her victory over death. He looked at the smoldering, burning ruins of the library, then at B, the realization hitting him with the force of a physical blow, sharper and more painful than any impact. Her demand for quiet, her desperate, unyielding push, her insistent command that they move. It hadn't been about rules or annoyance or her own perceived fussiness. It had been about survival. It had been about saving their lives. He had ignored her, mocked her, defiantly refused her, and she had saved him anyway. A profound shame, sharp, bitter, and utterly unfamiliar, twisted in his gut, replacing his youthful bravado. Chloe, still sobbing hysterically into her mother's shoulder, looked up at Mrs. Davies. Then her tear-filled eyes found B, a dawning horror and an overwhelming gratitude in her gaze. "Mom, Miss B, she told us to get out. She kept pushing us. She saved us." Her voice was raw with emotion, stripped of all sarcasm, all teenage defiance, leaving only the profound, unfiltered truth. The crowd, their initial panic slowly subsiding, now turned their collective gaze towards B, who stood quietly amidst the ongoing chaos, a solitary figure of incredible resilience and quiet strength. The wailing sirens of the arriving fire trucks and the frantic movements of emergency personnel swarming the scene seemed to fade into the background. In the midst of the destruction, the focus was singular, absolute it was on B, faces that had once held skepticism, impatience, or even mild disdain, now reflected profound awe, unadulterated gratitude, and a dawning, humbling understanding of the quiet heroism that had just transpired. Whispers of, "She saved them," and "She knew," rippled through the crowd, turning into a collective, almost reverent murmur of admiration. B, the unassuming, often overlooked librarian, had, in the ultimate crucible of peril, proven her immense worth, not just as a meticulous guardian of books and quiet, but as a fearless, compassionate protector of life itself. Her vindication was not just personal. It was a powerful, public acknowledgement of a heroism that had gone unseen and unappreciated for far too long. The roaring inferno had, paradoxically, illuminated her true light. The acrid scent of smoke still lingered in the air, a grim reminder of the Havenwood Community Library's almost complete obliteration. The once proud building was a skeletal ruin, its arched windows gaping, its shelves reduced to charred debris. Yet, amidst the physical devastation, a profound shift had occurred in the heart of the community. Beatrice Holloway, the unassuming librarian, had emerged not just as a survivor, but as an undeniable hero. The chaos of the explosion had, paradoxically, brought a new, profound calm, a sense of clear purpose, to her life. The immediate aftermath was a whirlwind of official investigations and public outcry. The police and fire marshal's joint investigation moved swiftly, fueled by the sheer scale of the disaster and the dramatic near loss of life. Their findings were chilling, confirming B's unspoken fears. The gas leak had indeed been caused by severely corroded, aging pipes, neglected for years, and the reason for this neglect was quickly laid bare. Records showed that significant funds, specifically allocated for the library's infrastructure maintenance and safety upgrades, had systematically been siphoned off over the past 3 years. The paper trail led directly to Victor Vance, the very Board of Trustees member who had dismissed B's concerns and tried to save money by cutting corners. Victor Vance, the man who had dismissed B's urgent pleas, was found alive, miraculously, pulled from the debris of his office by first responders, badly injured but alive. His survival, however, was a cruel twist of fate for him. He faced not just physical recovery, but the full, unforgiving weight of the law. The evidence against him was irrefutable, manipulated financial records, offshore accounts brimming with stolen library funds, and the horrifying testimony of library staff who revealed his consistent patterns of negligence and intimidation. He was swiftly arrested and charged with multiple felonies, including embezzlement, criminal negligence, and reckless endangerment, charges that carried substantial prison sentences. His public image, once meticulously crafted and admired, crumbled into dust, replaced by widespread condemnation and disgust. His avarice had not only cost him his freedom and reputation, but had nearly cost dozens of lives. Justice, though often slow, had finally, definitively arrived for the corrupt. The fallout extended to Mr. Henderson, the building superintendent. His dismissive attitude, his refusal to investigate B's initial reports, and his documented history of neglecting maintenance requests were exposed in the official inquiry. While not criminally charged, he was immediately stripped of his position, his retirement benefits severely curtailed, and his career in public service ended in disgrace. The city, reeling from the scandal, vowed a comprehensive overhaul of its public building maintenance protocols, a direct consequence of Henderson's negligence. The community's reaction to B, however, was a profound and heartfelt counterpoint to the disgust aimed at Victor. Mrs. Davies, Chloe's mother, was among the first and most vocal to express her deep remorse and gratitude. Days after the explosion, her daughter still visibly shaken but safe, Mrs. Davies sought out B, who was quietly assisting volunteers in sifting through the salvageable remains of the library, her practical nature refusing to rest. Mrs. Davies approached B tentatively, her usual brisk demeanor replaced by a humility B had never seen. Her eyes, often judgmental, were now filled with tears of profound regret and overwhelming gratitude. "Miss B," she began, Her voice choked with emotion. I don't know how to apologize. I was so wrong about you. I thought you were just difficult, fussy, and all this time, you were listening. You were seeing. You were trying to warn us. You saved Chloe's life. You saved all our children. She reached out, taking B's hand, her grip surprisingly firm. You are a true hero, Miss B. A real, honest-to-God hero. Her apology was genuine, raw, and deeply felt. Mrs. Davies not only apologized privately but became one of B's most fervent public advocates. She tirelessly organized a community fundraiser, not just for the library's reconstruction, but specifically to honor B. At a packed town hall meeting, she stood before hundreds of Havenwood residents, her voice clear and strong. "We owe everything to B. Holloway," she declared, tears streaming down her face. She saw what we couldn't. She heard what we wouldn't. And she acted when no one else would. She is the quiet strength of this community, and we must honor her. The standing ovation that followed was deafening, a roaring testament to B's vindication. The teenagers, too, underwent a visible transformation. Jason Miller and Chloe Davis, the former ringleaders of defiance, were profoundly shaken by the near-death experience. The image of B's blazing eyes, her raw command, and the subsequent explosion was seared into their minds. They visited B at her temporary office in the town hall, their usual bravado replaced by an almost painful awkwardness. "Miss B," Jason mumbled, his eyes fixed on his worn sneakers, his voice barely audible. I'm so sorry for being so loud, for not listening, for everything." He looked up, his gaze earnest. "You saved us. You were amazing." Chloe, surprisingly, was even more contrite. Her phone, the symbol of her former superficiality, was long gone. "I'm so sorry. Miss B," she whispered, tears in her eyes. "I was awful. I filmed you. I thought it would be funny. You risked your life for us. How can we ever make it up to you?" B looked at them, not with anger, but with a quiet understanding. She saw not the defiant teenagers, but the frightened children who had almost been lost. "Just learn from this. Children," she said, her voice soft but firm. "Learn to listen. Learn to pay attention. And learn that true bravery isn't about being loud, but about doing what's right, even when it's hard." Their apologies were genuine, and their transformation marked the beginning of a profound new relationship with B. The Havenwood Library Board, rocked by the scandal and moved by the overwhelming public support for B, made a unanimous and unprecedented decision. Not only would B be lauded as a town hero, but she would also be offered the position of library director. This was not merely a promotion. It was a profound recognition of her innate leadership, her unwavering dedication, and her unique, invaluable talents. The city council, eager to restore public trust, immediately approved a substantial budget for the library's reconstruction, granting Bay carte blanche to rebuild it as a state-of-the-art, safe, and truly community-focused institution. This new opportunity was not merely about material gain or professional advancement. It was deeply, profoundly meaningful. It was the chance for B to build a library that truly reflected her vision, a place where every child felt safe, where quiet contemplation was cherished, but also where hidden talents were nurtured and where every voice, no matter how soft, was heard. It was a chance to transform her quiet, solitary life into a vibrant, impactful legacy. She now had the resources, the authority, and most importantly, the unwavering support of a community that finally saw her. B had a long, heartfelt conversation with the newly appointed assistant director, a bright, forward-thinking woman named Sarah Jenkins, who had been brought in to help with the rebuilding process, and who quickly recognized B's extraordinary wisdom. Sarah had heard the whispers of B's unique hearing and, after the explosion, understood its critical role. "Miss Holloway," Sarah said, as they reviewed blueprints for the new library, "your ability, your hearing, it saved lives. It's an incredible gift." Bee smiled, a faint, weary smile. "It's been more of a burden sometimes. Truth be told, all the noise, the cacophony of the world. But yes, today it was a blessing." She looked at the detailed plans for the soundproofing in the new children's section, a feature she had personally insisted upon. "It's not just about hearing the bad things, Sarah. It's about listening to the good, too. The quiet hum of curiosity, the soft turning of pages, the gentle whispers of discovery. It's about truly understanding what people need, even when they don't say it out loud." They looked over the detailed blueprints of the new library, a phoenix rising from the ashes. It would be a testament not only to a community's resilience, but to one woman's quiet strength and her unique ability to hear what others couldn't. B, once an overlooked figure, now stood as the visionary architect of Havenwood's new intellectual and emotional heart. The journey had been terrifying, but the destination was a profound sense of peace, purpose, and profound interconnectedness. 1 decade later, the Havenwood Community Library. A magnificent phoenix risen from the smoldering ashes of catastrophe stood gleaming proudly under the warm Ohio sun. It was no longer merely a public building, but a vibrant, beating heart at the very center of Havenwood, a monumental testament to collective resilience, unwavering compassion, and the profound transformative power of a single, initially unheeded voice. The charred ruins and desolate memories of the past had given way to a triumph of modern architecture and thoughtful design, conceived to be both aesthetically pleasing and supremely functional, a beacon of knowledge and safety. Beatrice, now revered as Director Beatrice Holloway, moved through its sunlit, expansive halls not as a quiet guardian of enforced silence, but as the visionary architect of its very soul, a beloved figure of inspiration. The new library was a masterpiece of intelligent, user-centric design, meticulously planned to foster both vibrant community engagement and serene, individual contemplation. Sound-dampening panels were subtly integrated into the ceilings and walls of the bustling children's section, expertly absorbing the inevitable bursts of joyful laughter and excited chatter, without disturbing the sacred quietude of the main reading areas. Cozy, acoustically isolated, soundproof pods offered private, tranquil spaces for focused study, intimate conversations, or simply quiet contemplation, providing refuge from the vibrant energy of the open spaces. Interactive learning zones buzzed constantly with the excited activity of young minds exploring new concepts, while vast, meticulously curated digital archives opened up boundless new worlds of knowledge and discovery to every patron, regardless of age or background. Yet, despite its cutting-edge modernity and technological sophistication, the library miraculously retained a profound, almost palpable sense of warmth, welcome, and historical reverence. A direct testament to B's unwavering insistence on creating a space where every single person felt genuinely seen, heard, and valued. B herself had undergone a remarkable, deeply personal transformation that radiated outwards, touching everyone she encountered. The quiet, almost invisible librarian who had once blended seamlessly into the background was now a figure of immense, widespread respect and genuine affection. Her silver hair, once meticulously pulled back in a severe, almost unyielding bun, often softened into gentle, graceful waves, framing a face that, while still bearing the inevitable lines etched by age and past trials, was now illuminated by a perpetual, serene, and deeply contented smile. Her days were a rich tapestry woven with demanding yet fulfilling activities, crucial meetings with architects for planning future expansion projects, strategic discussions with influential community leaders about pioneering new programs, and, most joyfully, spending hands-on time directly with patrons, especially the children, guiding their curiosities and fostering their love for reading. She was no longer living in the quiet solitude that had once defined her existence. Her quaint apartment above the bakery remained, a nostalgic sanctuary filled with cherished memories. But her life was now rich with profound, genuine connections, perpetually surrounded by the sincere respect, deep admiration, and profound, overflowing love of a grateful, deeply appreciative community. Her unique, hypersensitive hearing, once a private burden she bore with quiet stoicism, had not only become a celebrated asset, but was now an integral part of her visionary leadership. It allowed her to detect subtle, almost imperceptible shifts in the library's environment, from the faintest, almost inaudible hum of a faulty HVAC unit that no one else could hear, to the almost imperceptible whispers of a child struggling silently with a difficult word in the hushed corners of the reading room. This extraordinary auditory ability, coupled with her inherent, deeply ingrained empathy and profound intuitive understanding of human and environmental nuances, made her an extraordinary leader, allowing her to anticipate needs, identify potential issues, and prevent problems long before they could escalate or even become apparent to others. The dramatic, terrifying events of a decade ago, though horrific and traumatic, had, ironically, forged unbreakable bonds within the community and fundamentally reshaped countless lives. Jason Miller and Chloe Davis, the defiant, headstrong teenagers who had once openly mocked Bee and deliberately ignored her pleas, were now in their mid-20s, accomplished professionals, and profoundly changed individuals. Jason, having pursued a successful degree in engineering, often volunteered his invaluable expertise to the library, meticulously overseeing complex wiring installations, structural improvements, and safety audits, ensuring the building's structural integrity and patron safety were paramount. He frequently spoke at community events and school assemblies, sharing his humbling, powerful story of youthful arrogance and the profound, life-altering lesson he had learned from Bee's quiet courage. "She didn't just save my physical life that day," he'd articulate, his voice earnest and full of genuine emotion. "She taught me what it truly means to listen, not just with your ears, but with your heart, with your whole being, to the warnings that are often whispered, not shouted." Chloe, now a talented and compassionate social worker, dedicated a significant portion of her time to counseling at-risk youth within the Havenwood community, drawing heavily from her own transformative near-death experience. She ran a hugely popular and impactful mentorship program directly at the library, teaching vital digital literacy skills and promoting responsible media consumption, often candidly using her own past attempt at creating a viral video of Bee's supposed meltdown as a powerful, relatable cautionary tale. She was Bee's most fervent advocate and devoted assistant, meticulously organizing annual Heroes' Day celebrations in Bee's honor, and passionately ensuring that Bee's extraordinary story of courage and intuitive wisdom was faithfully passed down to every new generation of Havenwood residents. Both Jason and Chloe stood as living, breathing testaments to Bee's enduring impact, their profound gratitude translating into tangible, unwavering, lifelong support for the library and its visionary director. Bee, driven by a profound, unyielding desire to pay it forward, to transform her past trauma into a wellspring of hope, established the groundbreaking Whispers and Woofs program, a subtle, poignant nod to her own unique auditory journey and the animals that had, at times, provided her only solace. This innovative, hugely successful program, thoughtfully housed within the library's new, vibrant spaces, focused on teaching children about the critical importance of acute observational skills, active and empathetic listening, and the often overlooked power of trusting one's own instincts. It meticulously paired quiet, sometimes withdrawn or socially anxious children with specially trained therapy dogs, gently encouraging them to communicate, connect, and build confidence through nonverbal cues, fostering a profound bond that transcended spoken language. Bee personally led many of these heartwarming sessions, sharing intimate anecdotes about her own life experiences, emphasizing how paying meticulous attention to the smallest, most seemingly insignificant details could often reveal the greatest, most profound truths, and how listening truly transcended mere sound, encompassing a deeper, holistic understanding of the world around them. She actively collaborated with local emergency services, developing innovative, age-appropriate interactive safety drills that encourage children to identify unusual smells, subtle sounds, and faint vibrations, empowering them to become mini detectives of their own environment, to trust their senses, just as she had been forced to do on that fateful day. These drills, carefully crafted to be engaging and educational rather than frightening, subtly yet effectively ingrained critical survival skills and a heightened sense of situational awareness in a generation that might otherwise have been dangerously oblivious. The library, under B's compassionate and astute leadership, also became a powerful hub for community healing and collective resilience. Survivors of the explosion, now older and with families of their own, often brought their children to the library, not just to read, but to share powerful, often tearful stories of B's quiet courage and the terrifying day that had changed them all. The event, though unspeakably tragic in its immediate physical impact, had, paradoxically, created a stronger, more interconnected, and profoundly grateful Havenwood. The community, once prone to superficial judgment and dismissive whispers, had learned the invaluable lesson of seeing beyond appearances, of recognizing heroism in the most unexpected of places, and of cherishing the quiet guardians who protect them. The final, poignant image of the story was not of chaos or destruction, but of profound peace, enduring wisdom, and a harmonious, unbreakable connection. It was a warm, golden, late afternoon, sunlight streaming generously through the magnificent arched windows of the new Havenwood Community Library, illuminating its gleaming surfaces and vibrant activity. B, her face soft with a deep, abiding contentment, was not in her spacious director's office, nor at the bustling main desk. She was nestled comfortably in one of the sound-dampening pods in the children's section, a vibrant, inviting space filled with soft carpets, colorful beanbag chairs, and the quiet magic of storytelling. Around her, a small group of children sat utterly captivated, their eyes wide with wonder as B, her voice gentle and melodious, read aloud from a large, beautifully illustrated storybook. Her words filled the quiet, acoustically perfect space, punctuated only by the soft, delighted giggles from a child, the gentle rustle of turning pages, and the subtle, rhythmic breathing of the therapy dog curled peacefully at her feet. Through the clear glass wall of the pod, B could see the rest of the bustling library teenagers, now far more mindful of their volume, engrossed in their studies in the quiet zones. Adults quietly browsed the extensive shelves, lost in their chosen narratives. The soft, almost imperceptible hum of a perfectly functioning, modern HVAC system, and the gentle murmur of productive, communal life. She noticed Leo, now a bright-eyed, confident 10-year-old, meticulously reshelving books in the children's section, a small, knowing smile on his face as he remembered B's earlier lesson on organization and care. She saw Jason and Chloe, now mature and responsible, volunteering diligently at the main desk, their laughter now appropriately subdued and respectful, their presence a powerful symbol of profound redemption and unwavering commitment. B smiled, a deep, contented, utterly peaceful smile that reached her eyes, crinkling them at the corners. The absolute silence she had once demanded, the precious quiet she had fought so desperately and perilously to preserve, was no longer a symbol of her isolation or the world's indifference. It was, instead, the very foundation upon which a vibrant, thriving, and deeply connected community had been magnificently rebuilt. Her simple, urgent requests for quiet had not only, miraculously, saved precious lives from a terrifying inferno, but had ultimately orchestrated a new, profound, and harmonious symphony of human connection, lifelong learning, and profound, heartfelt gratitude. In this haven of whispers, where every subtle sound and every quiet presence was cherished, her indelible legacy was secure, a brilliant beacon of hope and understanding for generations to come. If this story stirred your heart, if it reminds you that courage can alter destinies and that light always finds a path even in the deepest darkness, please leave a comment. Share this story with those who need inspiration. Like, subscribe, and hit the bell to never miss our upcoming stories.